1, 2, 3.
Mr. Ramanathan is going to be reading some very interesting works by Polish poets. To begin with, just to give you a little short brief about Readings in the Shed. It's a new initiative, a small initiative with a big heart. Our plan is to read texts from different parts of the world at different places in Bombay with different audiences and hopefully build a community. We started with a play which is written by Arjen Dorfman, based in Chile. At our last reading, we read short stories from Pakistan, written by Pakistani women writers, a lot of them first-time writers. And today we are reading works from Poland. So yeah, that's the plan with Readings in the Shed. What comes next, and we'll talk about it later. To tell you a little bit about Mr. Ramanathan, who sure does not need any introduction in a crowd like this, but he's written over 30 plays and he's directed over 20 plays, some of which are Cotton 54, Polyester 86, 3 Sakina Manzil and other plays, The Boy Who Stopped Smiling, Comrade, Kumkar. His plays are usually charged, connected to politics, connected to the scenario, prevailing, to our prevailing times. He says that he likes to write about everything that helps him ask questions and take a panga, in his own words. So it's not surprising that he's chosen to talk about and read works of Polish poets who also all took panga at some point in their life, and brilliant stuff. At Readings we have a ritual. Before we start, we like to have a 5-minute, few minutes, 5-minute silence. The reason for that being that we would like to believe that text creates a world which invites all readers and listeners to come and live in it. Coming from the outside and getting into that world which is going to be created here needs a little transition period to leave all that happened outside this and come and inhabit this world. So we're going to take a few minutes just to get ourselves into that world.
Shall we start? And thank you to Sapan and Sunil, and I can't see Sunil here. So congratulations to Sunil for the award. As some of you are aware, he won the Sangeet Natak award, which I think is prestigious. And there are some awards which they say, a person deserves it, And then there are some awards where the award deserves the person. I think in this case, I think the Sangeet Natak deserves Sunil, and long overdue, and of course, much well deserved. So congratulations. The second thing is, of course, thank you to Nikhil. Nikhil is sort of the Karta Darta of, and all this actually began as a very innocent call, I think, or WhatsApp, and where he asked, I do this small reading session, and would you be keen? And it so happened that I was reading one of these greats, and at that moment, purely on impulse, I said yes. And for the last 2 months, I've been regretting it, not because of any other thing. It's just, as you can see, this is what it has led me to. Innumerable conversations with people in Poland, and I realized how little I knew. And, of course, it's astonishing greatness which you confront. And when you confront that sort of greatness, it just, of course, humbles you. But more importantly, it just sort of brings you crashing down onto planet Earth, everything that you knew. So that is the second thing. So I've given a great deal of thought about how to present this, because it is a lot of poetry. So 2 things before I begin. One is I've never been to Poland. I don't possess a passport as of now. I don't have an Aadhaar officially, and I don't have a passport unofficially. So which means I've never been to any of these places or some of the spaces which these people have described. So that is the first sort of clarification. Secondly, whatever I'm sharing with you is based on my reading of English translations of course, Polish work. So it is second-hand. In some cases, I know that these poets have sort of, worked with a lot of their translators, because as you know, a lot of the Polish poets were emigrants, so they went on to, study, teach in Berkeley and other such universities. So their knowledge of English as second language was pretty good. So as a result, some of them have collaborated with their translators, but be that as it may, these are translations that I have relied on. So again, how to construct this evening. One, there are 2 ways to do anything in life. One is very systematic, and the other is anarchic. And I just chose the easy way out, which is chaotic. So, which is why it is like this. So everything needs a beginning, and we're going to try to give you a nice sort of a beginning. Poland is also about Chopin, and see if we can. So like we have the vivid Bharati tune or the Akashvani or Doordarshan, we have Chopin is a sort of integral part of, and we're going to try to play a piece. Coming on. So just to give you a flavor, this is the Polonaise in A major by Chopin, and it's the beginning of anything that starts on Polish radio, and this is what post-World War I, 1925, it's been the signature tune on all sort of radio stations. So that is the beginning. They say the first sentence in any speech is always the hardest. Well, so that is behind me now. But I have a feeling that the sentences to come, the 3rd, the 6th, the 10th, and so on to the final line will be just as hard. Since I'm supposed to talk about poetry, I've said very little on the subject, next to nothing in fact. And whenever I have said anything, I've always had the sneaking suspicion that I'm not very good at it. That is why my lecture will be rather short. All imperfection is easier to tolerate if served in small doses. So this is not me, this is the great Wisława Szymborska. This is part of her Nobel lecture on 7th December 1996. And this is the sort of great woman. She's known, among other things, and this will probably give you a little bit of context to her, is she's known as the Greta Garbo among poets. So therefore, obviously there is a persona about her, number one. And number two is that she was very, very reticent. And what I'll do is I'll quickly read 2 short poems about Szymborska, and then we will meet her. This one's called Writing a Resume, and you'll realize 2 things about her. One is she's extremely mischievous, And the second thing is that she will essentially talk about the most mundane things about life, which all of us do, the ordinary, the sort of riffraff. But what is extraordinary about Szymborska, and when you look at the body of work that she's produced, is that she starts with the absolutely mundane, but then develops that into something which makes her special. So writing a resume, which I suspect all of us have done. So Szymborska says, what needs to be done? Fill out the application, enclose the resume. Regardless of the length of life, a resume is best kept short, concise. Well-chosen facts are de rigueur. Landscapes are replaced by addresses. Shaky memories give way to unshakable dates. Of all your loves, mention only the marriage. Of all your children, only those who are born. Who knows you matters more than whom you know. Trips only if taken abroad. Memberships in what, but without the why. Honors, but not how they were earned. Write as if you've never talked to yourself. And always, always kept yourself at arm's length. Pass over in silence your dogs, cats, birds, dusty keepsakes, friends, and dreams. Price, not worth and title, not what is inside. His shoe size, not where he is off to, the one you pass off as yourself. In addition, a photograph with one ear showing. What matters is its shape, not what it hears. What is there to hear anyway? The clatter of paper shredders. So that's. And then there's a poem by Szymborska, which is a sort of cult poem, especially among a lot of young people, and sort of popularity of. It's a moving poem, and it has a popularity of sort of staggering proportions. It's a poem about a cat, and what she does is something quite nice, because it's actually the absence of someone who's dead, and she presents it from the perspective of the cat who's left behind. So imagine one of our 2 BHK flats in Jogeshwari East. There's a cat, and the cat is saying this. Cat in an empty apartment, die. You can't do that to a cat, since what can a cat do in an empty apartment? Climb the walls, rub up against the furniture. Nothing seems different here, but nothing is the same. Nothing has been moved, but there's more space. And at night time, no lamps are lit. Footsteps on the staircase, but these seem to be new ones. The hand that puts fish on the saucer, that has changed too. Something doesn't start at its usual time. Something doesn't happen as it should. Someone was always here, and that someone has suddenly disappeared, and stubbornly stays disappeared. Every closet has been examined, every shelf has been explored. Excavations under the carpet turned up nothing. A commandment was even broken, papers scattered everywhere. What remains to be done? Just sleep and wait. Just wait till he turns up. Just let him show his face. Will he ever get a lesson on what not to do to a cat? Sidle toward him as if unwilling, and ever so slow, on visibly offended paws, and no leaps or squeals, at least to start. So that is Cat in an Empty Apartment. And yeah. Since we are in the midst of a poetry reading, and it's extraordinary, there are 3 or 4 things all these poets do. They talk about poetry readings, and you'll realize how they do it differently. They also, of course, we won't have time to do this, so we use today as just a sort of, entrance into their world. They also talk about each other a lot. So poets writing about other poets, their friendships, meetings in cafes and bars and so on. So this is Szymborska writing about a poetry reading. To be a boxer or not to be there at all. Oh muse, where are our teeming crowds? 12 people in the room, 8 seats to spare. It's time to start this cultural affair. Half have come inside because it started raining outside. The rest are relatives, oh muse. The women here would love to rant and rave, but that's for boxing. Here they must behave. Dante's Inferno is ringside nowadays, likewise his Paradise, O Muse. Oh, not to be a boxer, but a poet, one sentenced to hard shellying for life, for lack of muscles forced to show the world, the sonnet that may make the high school reading lists with luck, O Muse, O bobtailed angel Pegasus. In the first row, a sweet old man's soft snore. He dreams his wife is alive again. What more, she's making him that tart she used to bake, a flame but carefully. Don't burn his cake, we start to read now. Shh, O Muse. Poetry reading by Szymborska. And again, you know, what happened with Szymborska, and of course some of them, is that once they attained this blockbuster, superstar nature, a lot of people started attending their poetry readings, so thousands and so on. But there's a wonderful anecdote about Milosz, so he got his Nobel in 1980, and he used to teach in Berkeley, and they had organized a poetry reading for him, and there were precisely 8 people, so there were 2 of them who were reading the poems. So thank you to all of you for coming, because we are more than 8, so that's wonderful. So there were 8 people, and Milosz suspected the 8 came because the person who was reading with him was a publisher. So they came because they wanted to sell their poems to him. Then something interesting happens where the Nobel is announced, and then there's again a poetry reading which is organized in Berkeley, and that one is sort of overflowing. There are sort of 800 people inside, they put these screens outside and there are people. And someone asked Milosz what happened. He said, I don't know, maybe the poetry just got better in 4 days. So, we go to the next one where we meet Szymborska and hopefully see what she's like. So this is actually from a little document, Ewa Lipska, and yeah.
Co to jest? Zaraz.
Ciężkie.
Ciężkie.
Jakieś metalowe albo kamienne coś.
Blisko.
Tak, tak. Tu nic nie.
Zajrzyj do
Medal jakiś.
Proszę bardzo. To
Jakiś medal.
Nie.
Tak mi się wydaje.
Nie. Nie medal.
Pieniądz.
Nie, żaden pieniądz.
No co to może być? Nie, no już nic więcej nie zgadnę, bo co? Chyba jakiś zegarek jeszcze dodatkowo. Nie no, to nie wiem. Tu się otwiera jeszcze? No daj spokój, boję się, że zepsuję.
Nie zepsujesz. Co to może być?
To jest moja bransoletka.
Nie.
Kajdany. Nie wiem, no.
To jest, wymyślił świat. Wiesz, świat wymyśla. Przychodzisz do restauracji i chcesz sobie powiesić torebkę. Rozumiesz? To wymyśla ludzkość.
Tak.
I sobie
Ale
wieszasz
bardzo
torebkę.
dobrze. Ludzkość musi wymyślać różne rzeczy potrzebne i niepotrzebne.
So she's born in 1923, and she made her debut with the socialist realist collection titled That's What We Live For. And it was considered to be ideologically the most correct of her works, and therefore also something which semantically got her into trouble. We'll come to that later. Basically 2 things that we need to know about her, and this she said in her interview. One is she tries to love humankind instead of human beings. And the second thing that you find with a lot of Szymborska is that she makes things accessible. So there's an extraordinary, again there's a lot, but there's an extraordinary collection which this documentary refers to. It's called The End and the Beginning, which was penned in '93. And she says something that after every war, someone has to tidy up. After every war, someone has to tidy up. Things won't pick themselves up after all. And this innocent or naive question about human history is her starting point, and then of course she marches on and does what Szymborska does best. We'll go to the next slide, which is. So I thought this is a nice way to introduce you to some of my friends. It's extremely difficult in this day and age, while we are in the 21st century, to have sort of human flesh and blood friends. So I started to befriend these 6 to start with. So these are my 6 friends, and that's Milosz, that's Szymborska, that's Adam Zagajewski, there's Zygmunt Herbert, Rozowiecz, and of course the great Sławomir Mrozek. Of this, the interesting thing is Adam Zagajewski is the only one who's alive, and Mrozek is the only one who is not a poet, but I think he's a poet, so that's why he's in this list. Besides being my... So besides being my friends, of course, they are great poets. And I noticed that all the great poets I have known enjoy calling themselves a poet. They pronounce this word without any inhibition. And I must share this, it's not just, of course, these poets, but last year I had the good fortune, so I've written something very tiny called My Encounter with the Peacock, and a very dear friend in Chennai called Ranveer Shah hosts a small poetry festival. And one of those wonderful, good fortune things where he paired me with 2 poets. One was Jayant Mahapatra and the other was Alan Seeley. Alan Seeley, as you know, has written the great Trottenhammer. Jayant Mahapatra writes in 2 languages, Oriya and English. And then, of course, in addition to just being, stupefied and overawed, so it's almost like, of course, we have these 6 legends, but it was a very different experience to sort of be in the same space as 2 poets who are in flesh and blood in front of you, eating dosa in front of you, and probably, because they're hungry, they take your dosa before, their plate arrives. Being in the same car with them and having the audacity to break Imlis at sort of Christian Missionary College in Chennai with Alan Seeley. But above all, what sort of struck me is that, under all the sort of humility and the deference and understanding the fact that they belong to this great big legacy of, words of thousands of years, is the fact that they were very proud of being called a poet. And that is something that is, hats off to all of them. The next slide is about chemistry, and this is again someone I admire, and I'll explain why she's there. One is, of course, the obvious reason is she's Polish. I tried to do a course in chemistry, and I suspect there are 2 sort of infatuations in my life, I think. So chemistry was thanks to the great Marie Curie, and theatre was thanks to Jennifer Kapoor. You see, you fall in love with someone and then you decide why did they do what they do, so you sort of march in that direction. So this is the great Marie Curie. She's never said to herself, I don't know, and the reason I fell in love with her. She said, I don't know. She probably would have wound up teaching chemistry at some private high school for young ladies from good families. She would have ended her days performing this otherwise perfectly respectable job, but she kept saying, I don't know. And these words led her not once, but twice to Stockholm, where restless, questing spirits are occasionally rewarded with the Nobel Prize. Poets are similar to chemists. If they're genuine, they must keep repeating, I don't know. Sorry, this I had to include. So, yeah, you can read this. What is the chemical name of the following benzene-like molecule? This is a metaphor. So, okay, for those of you who know a bit of chemistry, you would have got it. So poets, if they are genuine, must also keep a benzene ring and a few atoms in their pocket. It helps boost metaphors. Miroslav Holub, who is an immunologist and also a great poet, said, what is a poet? He who is hit by a word, hit by a stick, hit by a neutron, and above all, hit by stupidity. But our focus is not Prague, which is where Miroslav Holub comes from, and he's also a Nobel reckoner. Our focus is Krakow, and somewhere in that map is Krakow in Poland. So of course there is a Wikipedia page, and this is just to contextualize. There are innumerable things about Krakow, but I did the smart thing. I wrote an email to Gauri Sharma and Thomas from the Polish Institute in New Delhi, and they have given me 2 paragraphs on what is Krakow, so I'll share that with you. Krakow is the center of Polish culture and literary life. The city was declared the UNESCO City of Literature in 2013, becoming only the second non-English language city to hold that title along with Reykjavik, and the first in mainland Europe. There are many reasons for Krakow's designations. One is that the city holds 2 large literary festivals, the annual Konrad Festival and the Milosz Festival, and it hosts an annual book fair which attracts more than 40,000 visitors. It was here that Milosz, Nobel Prize in Literature in 1980, returned after many years in exile, and it is also the home of Szymborska, Nobel Prize in 1996, who lived her life here till her passing in 2012. Finally, in 2018, it has also been declared as the year of Zbigniew Herbert by the Polish Sejm, that is the parliament, and he was a candidate in 1968 for the Nobel Prize in Literature with another Polish writer called Witold Szymborska, who's also over there somewhere. And he's one of sort of Poland's most influential poets in the post-war period. He studied in Krakow, and much of his work deals with the oppressive nature of totalitarianism, especially communism, and we'll now go to Herbert. So this is him. Just a couple of biographical, and then I'll try to very quickly share the poems themselves, just for context. So he was born in Lvov in 1924, and again you will find that Zagajewski is also born in the same city. He was part of what is known as, in English, what we call the middle class, but in Poland and in the Soviet Union in those days, it is known as the intelligentsia. The relative, or perhaps truly profound ordinariness of his childhood was destroyed once and for all in September 1939 by the outbreak of the war. This is World War II. The first Nazi Germany, first it was Nazi Germany, and then within 17 days it was the Soviet Union which invaded the territory of Poland. This was filled with refugees from central Poland and then subsequently occupied by the Red Army. This meant the NKVD, the secret police, and then on cue, a lot of arrests, a lot of harassment, people who were sort of disappearing from the streets, mainly Poles, Jews, Ukrainians, and so on. The sudden leap from a last pre-war vacation to Stalin's terror must have been unbelievably brutal, and we find a reflection of some of that in Herbert's poems, which essentially originates from this experience. Interestingly enough, I mean, there are again just 2 biographical things. There is sometimes a tendency, because all these people wore many hats, either they worked in the radio or they were sort of, you know, military nurses. And in the case of Herbert, he was one of the thousands of young people living in abeyance. He tried to study and essentially hide his past, which was underground. He always sort of disappeared from the radar, he was always underground. And there was something curious that happened, that even though the Soviet Union was sort of controlling the territory of Poland, the new authorities imposed by Moscow persecuted former resistance fighters simply for having fought in their various ways against the Nazi invader. Their crime was, and Herbert was one of them, was to have been connected, often without fully being aware of it, since they operated in the local level and carried out small assignments. And this was essentially because the Polish government in exile in London, rather than the communist partisan movement. He again tried to publish a lot of his poems, couldn't get published, and therefore had to work in underground presses. And again, there were periodicals which, ironically enough, belonged to the Catholic Weekly, which is where his first collection of poems sort of emerges. Again, he's one of, like many of these, a poet in emigre, so he's traveling and living in other countries. He dies in July 1998, and essentially is a traveler in Paris, Berlin, Los Angeles, Warsaw, and this is again something that you will notice with all of them. So this is one of the sort of traits with the great Polish legends. There's a cult poem which I may not be able to spend too much of time, but I'll just give you a glimpse. So who is Herbert Zygmunt? Because I've given you a kind of background, and this extremely a person who has gone through extreme hardship and radical politics of unprecedented nature. So he himself helps us understand his poetry, and he has a series called Mr. Cogito. So if anyone is sort of keen, it is a portion of it is part of this collection, but there is also an independent thing of Mr. Cogito. And Herbert says, in Mr. Cogito and Imagination, so it's a series, Mr. Cogito and something, Mr. Cogito and Tamasha Studio, Mr. whatever. So, because Mr. Cogito longed to fully comprehend Pascal's night, the nature of diamonds, the melancholy of the prophets, the wrath of Achilles, the madness of genocides, the dreams of Mary Queen of Scots, the Neanderthals' fear, the despair of the last Aztecs, the long dying of Nietzsche, the joy of the Lascaux painter, the rise and fall of an oak, the rise and fall of Rome. I'll just quickly read 2 or 3 just to give you a sense. Since the theme is Krakow, the poem I've selected is a very beautiful poem in which he's on a train with a young boy, and the poem is called Journey to Krakow. As soon as the train got going, the tall dark type begins, and he speaks like this to the boy with a book on his knees. You like to read, boy? I like it, replies the latter. It makes the time go by, always plenty of work at home, sir. Here it doesn't bother people. Well, there you're certainly right. What is it you're reading? The Peasant, replies the latter. Very true to life, sir. Only a little too long. It's the right length for winter. I've also read The Folk Wedding. That's actually a play. Very hard to follow, sir. Too many people. The Deluge is something else again. You read it and it's like you've seen it really, he says. Great. Almost made into a movie. And then there's Hamlet by a foreign writer. Also very interesting. Only this Danish prince is a bit too much of a sissy. Tunnel. Dark in the train. The conversation suddenly breaks off. The authoritative commentary ceases. In the white margins, the prints of fingers in the soil have marked with rough thumbnail rapture and condemnation. In this, of course, the little boy is Herbert himself. So, there's another one which is called Furnished Room, but it's also very autobiographical in the sense it's the sort of thing Herbert has written a lot about, being in a small room and daydreaming, and it's nice. The poem I'll share is called Biology Teacher. Again, it's semi-autobiographical. Biology teacher. I cannot remember his face. He towered over me, his long legs spread, and I saw pillars into the intimate life of our ancestor, the Paramotium. He brought in a dark kernel and said, ergot. On his insistence, I became a father at the age of 10, when after a tense wait, a chestnut sunk in water, released a yellow shoot, and everything around burst into song. In the second year of the war, our biology teacher was killed by history's schoolyard bullies. If the biology teacher went to heaven, perhaps he now strolls along long rays of light wearing grey stockings with an enormous net and with a green box happily banging behind. But if he didn't go up, when on a path in summer I meet a beetle clambering over a mound of sand, I go up to it, make a bow and say, good day, sir, permit me to assist you. And then I transfer him gingerly and watch him go off until he has vanished into his murky professor's office at the end of an avenue of leaves. This is called The Biology Teacher. Then there's a series of prose poems which are great fun because they're almost like, hip hop. So, but again, I'll skip that because there are many, and I'm determined that we conclude in about precisely 66 minutes. So The poem I'm going to read is called Apollo and Narcissus. Now again, the reason for this, as you might have detected in Cogito, is that Herbert takes a lot of symbols from Greek and other mythologies. But the interesting things is, you see, when you come across, there are like the superstar and the blockbuster poets, and then there are the good poets. Sometimes with the good poets, they are overburdened by what they borrow, and they tend to become sort of prisoners to these references and the meanings. Whereas in the context to what Herbert does is he takes these great mythologies and then connects it to the reality of his time. So it's an extraordinary achievement, and you'll have to read a little more of him. In this poem that I'm going to share with you, what might seem at first when you hear it is that it's constructed on a sort of solid foundation of a myth. But then you realize that it's not just a dense academic poem, and many critiques have sort of looked at this poem and, like Szymborska's poem about the cat, it's a cult poem, that it's dense, it's full of erudition, it's inspired, it's only about libraries and museums, and I think what a fellow poet has sort of, when they read this, they said that nothing could be further from the truth, and you're not dealing with myths or with encyclopedias, but in this poem what Herbert is doing is talking about pain. He's talking about pain of a tortured body, and that tortured body is not just a body, but it's Poland, right? So I'll try to read this. It's like a slightly difficult poem, so it's something that ideally one should read in calm contemplation, by yourself. So the real duel of Apollo with Narcissus is absolute ear versus immense range. Takes place in the evening when, as we already know, the judges have awarded victory to the god. Bound tight to a tree, meticulously stripped of his skin, Narcissus howls. Before the howl reaches his tall ears, he reposes in the shadow of that howl. Shaken by a shudder of disgust, Apollo is cleaning his instrument. Only seemingly is the voice of Marsyas monotonous and composed of a single vowel, A. In reality, Marsyas relates the inexhaustible wealth of his body, bald mountains of liver, white ravens of ailment, rustling forests of lungs, sweet hillocks of muscle, joints, bile, blood, and shudders. The wintry wind of bone over the salt of memory, shaken by a shudder of disgust, Apollo is cleaning his instrument. Now to the chorus is joined the backbone of Marsyas, in principle the same A, only deeper with the addition of rust. There is already beyond the endurance of the god with nerves of artificial fiber, along a gravel path hedged with box, the victor departs, wondering, whether out of Marsyas's howling there will not someday arise a new kind of art, let us say something concrete. Suddenly at his feet falls a petrified nightingale. He looks back and sees that the hair of the tree to which Marsyas has fastened is white completely. I'll just read a small one and then we'll move on. Pebble. I like this one because Bombay is a city of pebbles. So. The pebble is a perfect creature, equal to itself, mindful of its limits, filled exactly with a pebbly meaning, with a scent which does not remind one of anything, does not frighten anything away, does not arouse desire. Its ardor and coldness are just and full of dignity. I feel a heavy remorse when I hold it in my hand and its noble body is permeated by a false warmth. Pebbles cannot be tamed. To the end, they will look at us with a calm and very clear eye. We'll move on, otherwise we'll start with this one. But yeah, we can move to the next one. So, I mean, some of you must be wondering why this sort of obsession with Krakow and Poland and so on. So this is again one more of my gurus. This is an Argentinian gentleman called Alberto Manguel. And there are two things about Manguel. One is that he was a reader for Borges. So Borges walks into a bookstore. As you know, towards the latter part of his life, he couldn't read. His eyesight was disappearing. There's a book in the bookshelf. He asks for it. There's a tender. He asks him, can you select such and such book from such and such shelf? Manguel pulls it out, He says, no, sorry, I can't read. Can you read it for me? And Manguel reads. And then he says, you have a very good voice. Can you come home and in the evening at such and such address, and I will give you so many rupees or what have you. Manguel thinks that the old man is a leech, and he is hitting on him. So he complains to the the book owner, and then that's when he learns that this is the great Borges, and of course then the friendship begins. The other extraordinary thing about Manguel is that he has a library inside his head, like Borges. Borges was, so imagine the Asiatic Library, the equivalent of that in Buenos Aires, and he is the head of that particular library in Buenos Aires. Now the extraordinary thing about is the fact that Borges has gone blind by then, or he's visually impaired. So he knows. But he knows each and every book inside out, and he also has indexed each and every book inside the sort of database of his brain. And Manguel sort of follows the same process. As a result, he not only knows the books, he knows what the plot lines are, and so on and so forth. Subsequent to which, Manguel writes this book, which is a tribute to imaginary spaces and places. And the book is like a travelogue, and unlike most travelogues that we have come across where people write about, Singapore or Machu Picchu or so on, what Manguel does is that he takes places which are imagined. So for example, Wonderland, in Alice in the Wonderland, and then he writes a travelogue about that. What is the good stuff to eat there? What are the spots to see, and so on. So he takes all these imagined spaces. For Lord of the Rings, you would actually go there to these spaces and talk about Middle Earth as if it really existed. And what should a good tourist do there for 3 days? So an extraordinary man and great genius. So he is my starting point for Krakow. I have kept Manguel imaginary land on one side, and I've imagined my Krakow in my own way. And it's, I suspect, what a lot of us do when for instance, I've never been to Dublin. So James Joyce is sort of being my entry point into Dublin, and I'm happy with that. I suspect if I ever go to Dublin, I'll be disappointed, So likewise, Saramago, Lisbon, Rushdie, Bombay, and so on and so forth. And it's based on this imagined thing. I again was, as I am being presumptuous today, I was presumptuous. I'd written a small play some time ago, which is called Shakespeare and She, in which I had sort of based a character who had traveled to Krakow extensively. And again, this is just on borrowed readings. And again, the only reason why Krakow had fascinated me at that time was because the patron saint of Krakow is Saint Stanislaus. And it so happened that I went to a school which is called Saint Stanislaus. And interestingly enough, it's a school run by Jesuits. And the reason I'm sharing all this is because some of it will lead into a better understanding of what we mean when we say the church is involved in certain things. It was a school run by Jesuits, essentially Spanish Jesuits, and I subsequently come to know that the patron saint of Krakow is a different Stanislaus. He was a Bishop Stanislaus who was killed, whereas the Stanislaus I know of from the school was a 17-year-old sort of genius who then sort of rebels against the church and so on and so forth. And then that's how one sort of wrote a play. And curiously enough, the play is dwelling upon certain things that these poets had sort of shared with me over 2 decades or what have you, essentially about words being murdered, vanishing languages, and silence. And then the antagonist says, isn't that a bit dramatic? So she replies, my PhD guide didn't seem to think so. He was Polish, 2 years older to me, and he knew his Milosh by heart. Told me to forget all this and translate the Kama Sutra for the Polish people. She's an Indian girl. The PhD was drafted in the wee hours of a winter night in an underground jazz bar in Krakow. It was the Harris Piano in 28 Reinig Glauni Street. And he asked her, you were drinking bison grass vodka followed by beer with ginger juice. And there was Lukasz Winisewski on vocals and harmonica along with his band. And that's what we did. And so that sort of became my view of the city till this. We can move to the next one. And these were essentially also borrowing. So, for example, my niece, she, for some strange reason, she's someone who's doing work in systems and computer systems. And she was in Krakow, and which is how that character from that play was sort of, created. And one of the early emails that she had shared with me, and that's how sort of things get triggered, is that she had described the town. So there was a deal made that if possible she shares every new city that she goes to. She sends a short email to me. So she describes the city. There is a bustling town square from where I have bought a clock which will sometime later be poised somewhere in your house, surrounded by restaurants with outdoor seatings. Then there is a college dorm that I stayed at, where the students would drink lots and lots of beer until the wee hours of the morning in a very noisy manner. Poland is one of the top beer drinking countries in the world. And then the thing was that she was staying in Warsaw in those days, and she was in Krakow for a football game, and something had happened as a result of which she missed the last train that left Krakow to go to Poland. And as a result of which she was stranded in the station at Krakow. And of course there was a lot of merriment and drinking because it was post the football game. But the interesting thing she said was, as the sort of night sort of grew, so 2, 3 in the morning, and at one point of time she says that there was actually a reading that was transpired, like a public reading, something like what we are doing right now, which was happening on the railway platform of Krakow, where there were these 2 young college kids who were reading out aloud, and there were kids from across the platform listening as part of the audience while they were waiting for the 4:44 train to come. And so I asked her what were they reading, and so she mentioned this man, Slavomir Mrozek, and so we'll move to him. Interestingly enough, he's a playwright. He's also a short story writer and writes a lot of sketches. Extraordinarily enough, he's also an illustrator. So a lot of the stuff that you see here is part of Mrozek's world, literally. And that's another reason to be in love with Poland, is also the exquisiteness of typography. And a lot of that emerged from the fact that here is a society which was under repression. So a lot of the street art, which was protest art, because there was no voice. If you remember Herbert, a lot of the works that he was producing was actually produced by the Catholic Church underground. So a lot of the poems and things were actually written on walls. And so these guys arrived at a system at actually making this look beautiful and aesthetic on the walls and streets of Poland. Mrozek is part of that particular tradition. Again, there are some wonderful sketches. The extraordinary thing about Mrozek is, Bombay knows a lot about Mrozek because of Satyadev Dubey. I don't know how he managed, but he managed to stage something like 4 or 5 Mrozek plays in Bombay 20 years ago. So, this is fun because Mrozek has a lot of fun. So, this one's called A Fact, and like I said, this is not a poem. It's about a very upright Polish lady, Catholic in all her sort of economical sensibility, going to a father for confession. Okay? I want to confess to you, Father. I'm not sure I'll be able to. Could you, Father? I have a husband. Question mark. I beg your pardon. Oh, no, really. Of course we are married. The organ was playing and I wore a long white veil. There was incense and lilies, and I said yes. And everybody was happy, and Mummy was crying, and go on. Just a moment, I'm coming to that, Father. I was a poor young girl. I had big eyes and long pigtails. He came in a car. He was big and so strong. He walked with me to the top of a hill, and in his clear, resonant voice, he spoke about the future. He had so many plans. I fondled the shiny metal buttons on his uniform. I liked touching them with my cheek and seeing myself reflected in them like a mirror. Yes, go on. Yes, Father. Of course I knew it was my vanity. I'm sorry. Then we got married. Okay. No, not at all. He didn't change after the wedding. He's always been firm, but Father, always most considerate. Of course we had our disagreements, but never serious. We were almost always together. He practically never left me. But Father, how can you even suggest that? Preposterous, really. Yes, I've heard about it, but he isn't, never, nothing like that at all. Go on. Perhaps I don't know, but I'm the one who comes to confession, not he. Here I'm in need of help. I need your advice. I want consoling. No, I'm not crying, Father. Take my hand, Father. Yes. Yes, of course I married him because I was in love with him. Where have I sinned, oh Father? Ask anybody about him. They will tell you how respected he is, how gifted, how worthy. Go on. Pardon? Go on. No, never, really, never. I haven't been unfaithful to him, not even in my thoughts. I have been a faithful wife, Father. Do you believe me, Father? No sign from there. No, Father. Again, no. So what's all this about, Father? I have come here. No, it's impossible to believe it. I have come here, 7 years of living with him. Last summer we went on holiday. I persuaded him to take a rest. He's got an important job, much work, enormous responsibility, the whole country. One morning at breakfast, we were sitting opposite each other. Behind him was an open window. Through it, I could see the gardens, the trees. The wallpaper in the room was printed in a pattern of little flowers, tens of thousands of little pink flowers. When he was lifting his cup, I looked at him. There was no special reason or purpose behind my gaze. And then I saw what? Yes, what did I see, Father? How can it be that for 7 years I shared his table and his bed, and only now do advise me, Father? Because if it is true, it's a sin. Go on, go on. It was only then that I noticed that my husband was made of plastic. Yes, really? Yes. All of him, he's artificial. I bent over him. My eyes must have been very wide open because he put down his cup and asked calmly, what's the matter? No, I'm not mistaken this time. He's always been made of plastic. All of him. Why had I not noticed it before? And now what's going to happen? Go on. An annulment of the marriage? But Father, that's impossible. We also have children. A lot of Mrozek was, and Stanislav Lem and people like that were in the realm of fiction. And you know, this was again one of the truths that emerges from Poland, and you'll see that in sort of harsh, harsh white lights, is that a lot of things which they could not speak about in reality, they were able to fictionalize. Because two things happened. One was it could sort of, dodge the surveillance. And the second thing was they were able to talk about things in this kind of a metaphoric way about, yeah. So again, what started happening is, no, I think it's the previous one. The Polish predilections. So what happened is that I had a lot of questions, and sort of, being a bit pedagogic, I sort of asked a few people these questions, and so there were basically 4 questions I set out, and I identified a few people who were essentially from Poland, and tried to solicit an answer to understand something about these poets, and also what is happening today in terms of the contemporary nature. So the first question was, Poland historians like Eric Hobsbawm and so on, say is the Achilles heel of Europe. Do you agree? That was the first sort of question. To which the answer resoundingly was no. I mean, it was, most of them sort of said, we don't agree with that. The second question is, what does it mean that we celebrate the birthday of Mozart and the liberation of the Auschwitz on the same day? What does it mean? To which again, some of them did not choose to reply to this. A few of them said, I cannot answer this question. For me, it does not mean anything. And then the third question I asked was a piece by Chopin which you adore. And one very interesting reply that I got was, although I'm Polish, I don't listen to Chopin and I don't like Chopin either. The fourth question, which was, what literature shaped your imagination as you grew up? One poem that defines Poland for you. And of course there were the standard replies, which were, there were many poems, not just one poem, but non-fiction. But out of that, there were 4 email replies that came, and the name that sort of popped up was Anna Swor. And interestingly enough, she's not there in the list of 6 that I'd shared with you as my sort of friends. This was a discovery for me during the course of this particular project. So there are 1 or 2 poems by Anna Swor that I was aware of, but I was not, I had not read her, to be honest. So, who is she? She's born in 1909, dies in 1984. Her full name is Anna Swirzynska, and the more and more I read her, I just found her as probably, someone in kindred spirit and someone with whom I could relate to. Yesterday we had a session over here where the playwright Rajiv Naik was asked a question, what is it that he seeks in playwriting? And he said something about, playwriting being, there should be a certain level of spareness and a certain level of economics of, words. And I find a lot of that in Anna Swor. She is probably the most concise poet that I have sort of come across. In addition to that, so she was essentially someone who grew up during both wars, World War I and World War II. And interestingly enough, also makes an interesting theory which says that the war never stopped. It just continued. So the historians say it was 1914 and then 1939. But with Anna Swor, she says that the war did not stop in 1919 or 1920, depending on which part of the world you are. The pain, the anguish, the mutilation of human bodies continued, and the games that governments played continued, and Poland, of course, was at the center of that. So those 20 years of hiatus was actually the war was just going on, except nobody noticed. But she writes about this with a great amount of intensity and warmth. They call her a late bloomer, and she is a militant feminist. She was a trained nurse in a hospital, and one of her first sort of biographical sketches is actually the stories that the soldiers on the hospital bed told her. So a bit like what Svetlana Alexievich has done, the Nobel Prize right now, where she's collecting these stories. So something akin to that is what Anna Swor does. And yeah, a lot of her poems are about war, and a lot of them are about Nazi occupation, yeah, in Poland. So I'm just quickly reading a couple of poems so you just get a sense of who this wonderful woman is. This is Anna Swor. The first poem is called The Same Inside. Walking to your place for a love feast, I saw at a street corner an old beggar woman. I took her hand, kissed her delicate cheek. We talked as she was, the same inside as I am, from the same kind. I sensed this instantly, as a dog knows by scent another dog. I gave her money. I could not part from her. After all, one needs someone who's close. And then I no longer knew why I was walking to your place. This one's called The Same Inside. I'll read two fun poems. She was also very mischievous, and there was a saying in Poland that Eros talks to Anna directly. I mean, he sends these erotic messages to her and she jots it down. So, troubles with the soul at morning calisthenics. So this is a conversation with the soul. Lying down, I lift my legs. My soul by mistake jumps into my legs. This is not convenient for my soul. Besides, the soul must branch because my legs are two. When I stand on my head, my soul sinks down to my head. She is then in her place. But then, how long can you stand on your head, especially if you do not know how to stand on your head? I starve my belly for a sublime purpose. So here she's having, like in the previous one, she has a conversation with the soul. Here she's having a conversation with her belly. But she says that the woman's belly is slightly different from a man's belly, and therefore, which will emerge from the poem, and it's emotionally a little more traumatized. I starve my belly for a sublime purpose. 3 days I starve my belly so that it learns to eat the sun. I say to it, Mr. Belly, I am ashamed of you. You must spiritualize yourself. You must eat the sun. But the belly keeps silent for 3 days. It is not easy to waken in its higher inspirations. Yes, I hope for the best. This morning, tanning myself on the beach, I noticed that little by little, the times are different. It's not an independent Poland when she's writing, and it was slightly more independent Poland, and you will see the contrast. Poetry reading. I'm curled into a ball like a dog that is cold. Who will tell me why I was born? Why this monstrosity called life? The telephone rings. I have to give a poetry reading. I enter. 100 people, 100 pairs of eyes. They look, they wait. I know for what. I am supposed to tell them why they were born. I am supposed to tell them why there is this monstrosity called life. Yeah. And then continuing with the questions, there was one person who just sent this. Her name is, I will not disclose her entire name, but her name is RP. She's done a doctorate. She's from Tel Aviv in Israel. And she says, oops, I am the living evidence of misplaced identities. I have absolutely no knowledge, intimacy, affection to Polish culture. Sorry. And pretty rude. So I dug out a little more, and there were two things. One is, of course, she is a Jew, so they had to sort of escape Poland. And the slogan in their family, which she recounts, is it was just 6 words, which is "Run, the fatherland is coming," and that was the thing. And cut to, there is Pilsudski, who was the leader of the newly independent Poland in 1918, and he says, and he makes this statement again from the pulpit, as politicians are, it is the state which makes the nation and not the nation the state. And it is in this sort of context that one has to understand what she's saying, and then of course come to our next poet, which is Tadeusz Rozowicz's. Again, one of the greatest poets probably who inhabit the land of Poland, again closely associated with Krakow. And again, our friends from the Polish Institute sent me these couple of things which I'll share. After the war, he became a member of the Artists Club in Krakow, a conglomeration of artists and intellectuals that began to meet regularly in the city from 1948. It was a successor to the first Krakow group that functioned between 1933 and 37, and a precursor to the second Krakow group that started operating in 1957. This collection is called Sobbing Superpower, which I suspect says a lot. A couple of points which sort of whatever I have gauged based on understanding his work and so on is just 2 or 3 things, and then we'll actually move on to the poem. So he's a Polish poet, and his youth, or rather his formative part of his youth or growing up, was essentially exposure to the cruelties of war. And if you recall what Anna Swor says, the war was an extended nightmare. So it was a constant exposure to those cruelties. Like Anna Swor, who worked as a nurse in a military hospital, he fought against the Nazis as a soldier in the guerrilla unit. So he was, in addition to being a great poet, of course, this. And that experience influenced his poetry, in which, we use this word in the 20th century as sort of nihilism, or this desperate nihilism, which is sort of prevalent. But in his case, what you find is, of course, that nihilism is there, because, you are trapped in a city and, there's no food and you don't know where your loved ones are. But in addition to that sort of nihilism, he was a compassionate interpreter of human conditions. And that is something that you get a sense of, that tenderness in a lot of his work. And one reason why I admire him greatly and why I rate him as someone to sort of look up to is, he reminds me a lot of my other sort of big guru, which is Samuel Beckett. And a lot of his poems, because you can understand the turmoil in which he's living his life, is about absence. So it's always absence of something, and something that is attainable, but it exists. So that hope that tomorrow will come. Yeah. Are you all okay? I was writing. This will remind you of that movie called Piano, if you've seen the film, I was writing. For a short while or an hour, evening night seized by anger, I either trembled or was sitting speechless beside myself, eyes misting over with tears. I had been writing. I had been writing for a very long time, and then I noticed there was no pen in my hand. Read 2 more so that we can move on. Then he's written a poem. He was also a friend, rather. He was also mentored by Milosz, which is how he sort of sharpened the skills. He writes a poem called Poet Emeritus, and we'll come to Milosz next. So he says about Milosz. He sits down on a bench, takes off his glasses, closes his eyes, wipes off his glasses, opens the newspaper, takes a look at the world, folds the paper, gets up, loses his balance, leans on his cane, reads the writing on the bench, walks, talks to himself, speaks with other dead poets. 2 women come up to him. They ask whether he reads the Bible, believes in hell, the end of the world, paradise on earth. He smiles, nods his head. In his old age, he prefers speaking with people who are generally silent. He walks away, sits on a bench, looks at the cloud, then a raven, flies up to him, strokes a black feather across his lips, seals them, and flies away. Just one last poem by him. It's called Rain in Krakow. Rain in Krakow, rain falls on the Wawel dragon, on the bones of giants, on Kosciuszko's mound, on the Mickiewicz monument, on Pondowski's Ecstasy, on Mr. Dulski, on the bugle call from the tower of St. Mary's Church, rain. Rain in Krakow falls on the white Skalka, on the green Blonia grasslands, on Marshal Pilsudski's coffin, beneath the silver bells on grey infantry. Clouds settle, blanketing Krakow, rain. Rain falls on the eyes of Wyspiański, on his blind stained glass, the timid eye of a clear blue sky, a thunderbolt from above. Long-legged girls in platform shoes fold up their bright umbrellas. It clears up, the sun comes out. I wander around monasteries looking for the dance of death. In the hotel room, I try to catch a fleeting poem. Onto a sheet of paper, I pin a butterfly, a blue one, a blot of sky. Rain, rain, rain in Krakow. I'm reading Norwood. It's sweet to be asleep, sweeter still to be made of stone. Good night, dear friends, good night. Poets, dead and living, good night, poetry. Yeah. And then again, just one more email. This is sort of, you could try to read it. So these are essentially very young people who are, of course, children of the newborn 21st century or the just born 21st century, and their response to of course, history of Poland, but also this legacy that they wear, you know, they are sort of the crucifix that they have to carry with them, literally. This is Milosz, and he's the man who said, what is poetry which does not save nations or people? And he's probably on scale in terms of stature as big as Blake, as big as Milton, as big as Dante. And if, you know, one can be a bit irreverential about this, one can call him the Bach of the 20th century, you know, so he's there. He was born in Lithuania, which was the village of his grandparents, and his father was an engineer in the Russian army. And again, extremely peculiar circumstances, because they were the gentry, if you remember the word I use, intelligentsia, middle class, who owned manor houses, and they spoke essentially in Polish. And for them worked a whole lot of people who were essentially the peasantry, but who interestingly enough spoke Lithuania. And then in that particular town you had the Jews who spoke Yiddish, and then you had middle class Jews, people like the lady who responded saying, I don't want to remember anything about Poland, who basically spoke Russian, and administrative middle class people again who essentially spoke Russian. Again, a very checkered life, lot of travelings, both in Europe, and then of course subsequently he taught in the US, in Berkeley. And there are two reasons why I'm personally fond of him. One is, he says that he was very particular about poetry readings. So there were two things he insisted on, that if ever there was a poetry reading, it needed to be very formal, and for which he always wore a tweed jacket. And he always insisted that fellow readers on stage and so on, wore tweed jackets. So it was sort of like a ritual. And the second thing was that he always insisted that poetry is about whining, it's about Dionysus. So there shall be wine while we read, it's not just a barren affair. So here, of course, post this, we'll all do that. But, and the second thing why I really like him is, I'm very nervous about doing this sort of thing, you know. I sweat, and then for like almost 2 weeks, I'm on like antidepressants and popping pills and so on. And then there is an account in one of these books where Milosz writes, oh God, how much I sweated. And then I was so relieved. Of course, the context was very different, because he was reading for John Pope Paul II, and he had to explain Polish poetry in all its context. But he had to do this 2 hours of reading, and while he read, he sweated, and he did a really bad and shoddy job. And you know, it's nice because here is someone who is at that level. It's like, you know, you play cricket, and when Virat Kohli admits that, you know, he's getting out and having the same cricket problems as you just feels sort of nice. There are two other things. One was that when he went to the US, he, you know, it always seems that when these poets go into their escape, there were two things he did. One was, of course, he wrote against the sort of totalitarianism of what was happening in Poland. When he went to the university in the US, he had to teach, and there was no syllabus or there was no course of Polish literature, so he literally invented that particular course. And there's a syllabus, you know, and like Borges, like Alberto Manguel, it was of course all in his head, but this whole habit of sort of getting that into books and teaching classrooms of people, that was something that he contributed. And he found a very interesting way. He started teaching Dostoevsky in Russia, in the US, and his plan was that through Dostoevsky from the Russians, so this little mini victory that he had with them. And there is this wonderful anecdote about he being in a classroom that many students came to attend, and then there was a dog that entered, and he was scared of dogs. And it was a vicious kind of a dog which started barking in a classroom. It happens at Kalina campus also, so don't be sort of shocked. So when the dog started barking and the students got a bit sort of upset about it, he said, "No, don't worry, that is Dostoevsky in disguise." So, and the other wonderful sort of thing about him is that, you know, he was asked, because in, you know, comparative literature studies and what have you, you are always asked these questions. So Ezra Pound had made some comment, and he was asked to respond to what Ezra Pound had said about him. So he thought, and then he says, Ezra Pound, to be fooled by Stalin, okay, but to be fooled by Mussolini, unintelligible. Yeah, for those of you who know what I'm saying, you'll get it. The other thing was when he won the Nobel Prize in 1980, he was not in Poland, and that was probably the first time the government over there recognized him in their little encyclopedia. You know, like we have our Samit Nataks and Sahitya, they published something. And in a small paragraph which was called Poets of No, let me get this right, the group of poets of no particular consequence, he was sort of listed. So that was, or innocuous poets. But the interesting thing that happened was in the cities of Warsaw, because, you know, as I was telling you about this underground publishing and so on, there were these huge queues, you know, like you have in Bombay for milk or ration cards or something, but these huge queues of people at 4, 5 in the morning standing basically to get a copy of a particular poem that he had written, and they knew that this is going to be sort of available. And there was a newspaper cartoon, which is one of the things I was trying to dig out to share with you. So it's a strip of cartoon which appeared in one of the leading Polish papers, and in that basically a man is reading a book, and there is a kind of person with a knife who's watching him from the side of the street. And then the next panel is he approaches him, and this man is continuing to read this book, and then it goes on, and then finally the man is stabbed and he's lying on the book, and the guy who has stabbed him in the back moves on with the knife, and then the fourth panel is the book on the floor which shows Milosz. You know, so that was the sort of sense that you could be killed for reading Milosz. All right. And then therefore when in 1989 the Solidarity movement happened, there were 3 people who were sort of mainly they hold responsible for that entire struggle for independence in Poland. One was of course Walesa, then of course John Pope Paul II, which again dates back to my connection with St. Stanislaus and the Jesuit school and so on, because he was part of that tradition, and of course the great Milosz. So that's a lot about him. I'll just read 3. Again, a lot of Milosz is available, and he was very, very particular about translation, that he worked with them, because Robert Haas and, you know, others, they were part of the same university campus, so he actually had an opportunity to banter, change words, modify, etc. Interestingly enough, he's also done a huge amount of service in terms, so something similar to what Tendulkar did with the other playwrights in India, Vijay Tendulkar. He has translated a lot of the other poets that I'm reading. He, Adam Zagajewski, because of their felicity with 2 or 3 languages, translate them into multiple languages, and which is why people like us in Bombay can have access to it. Anna Swar, almost the entire work is translated by Milosz. Yeah. So I'll just read 2 or 3 poems. This, as you can see, is an older edition and is something that has a lot of fond memories. So, Encounter. We were riding through frozen fields in a wagon at dawn. A red wing rose in the darkness, and suddenly a hare ran across the road, One of us pointed to it with his hand. That was long ago. Today neither of them is alive, not the hare nor the man who made the gesture. Oh my love, where are they? Where are they going? The flash of a hand, streak of movement, rustle of pebbles, I ask, not out of sorrow, but in wonder. This was written in 1936. Then there is again a very short poem written in Berkeley in 1965, which is called Window. I looked out the window at dawn and saw a young apple tree translucent in brightness. And when I looked out at dawn once again, an apple tree laden with fruit stood there. Many years had probably gone by, but I remember nothing of what happened in my sleep. And just the last one, which is called Return to Krakow. So I returned here from the big capitals to a town in a narrow valley under the cathedral hill with royal tombs, to a square under the tower and the shrill trumpet sounding noon, breaking its note in half because the Tartar arrow has once again struck the trumpeter and pigeons, and the garish kerchiefs of women selling flowers and groups chattering under the Gothic portico of the church. My trunk of books arrived this time for good. What I know of my laborious life, it was lived. Faces are paler in memory than on daguerreotypes. I don't need to write memos and letters every morning. Others will take over, always with the same hope. The one we know is senseless and devote our lives to. Our country will remain what it is, the backyard of empires, nursing its humiliation with provincial daydreams. I leave for a morning walk, tapping with my cane. The places of old people are taken by new old people. And where the girls once strolled in their rustling skirts, new ones are strolling proud of their beauty. And children trundle hoops for more than half a century. In a basement, a cobbler looks up from his bench. A hunchback passes by with his inner lament. Then a fashionable lady, a fat image of the deadly sins. So the earth endures in every petty matter, and in the lives of men irreversible. And it seems a relief to win, to lose, what for? The world is going to forget us in any case. And my final friend. So he's an extraordinary man, and as I said, he is, I think the best way to describe him is that he's a future Nobel laureate. So, you know, he's someone who, so all the poets that I've shared thus far are essentially poets of the 20th century, which everybody calls the short 20th century. Adam Zagajewski is probably the child of the 20th, I mean, he looks extremely old, but he is the child of the 21st century. He's also a member of the new wave of the Polish poets. So this is the sort of avant-garde movement. And it's very interesting because at that particular point of time, cut to Bombay, you have, you know, Dalit Panther movement happening on the streets in Worli. You have Ashok Shahane, Arun Kolatkar moving around with a lamp in search of Dadaism on Nariman Point. So this is the kind of world that we are inhabiting, and Adam Zagajewski is part of that generation of the 68. Again, a rebel. So what I'll do is very quickly read 2 or 3 of his poems. A lot of things, as I told you, I'm reading this in English, but each of these poets have a certain rhythm and a certain cadence to it, the way they phrase their words. So depending on who they are, and for example, Milos is a percussion poet. So a lot of it is, if you hear him in Polish, and there is stuff on YouTube, he's very much, you know, boom, boom, bam, boom, boom. So it is that sort of a rhythm. And Zagajewski is a little more gentler. He's somebody who talks to himself. He's a little shy. He's what we say, you know, a reluctant poet. Some of the other poets are more sort of melodic in the sense that, you know, you can imagine a harp playing while the poetry is being written and so on. So this is the great Adam Zagajewski. I'll read again 2 or 3 and then we'll, I think, conclude. Refugees. Bent under burdens which sometimes can be seen and sometimes can't, they trudge through mud or desert sands hunched, hungry. Silent men in heavy jackets dressed for all 4 seasons. Old women with crumpled faces clutching something, a child, the family lamp, the last loaf of bread. It could be Bosnia today, Poland in September 39, France 8 months later, Germany in 45, Somalia, Afghanistan, Egypt. There's always a wagon, or at least a wheelbarrow full of treasures, a quilt, a silver cup, the fading scent of home, a car out of gas marooned in a ditch, a horse which will soon be left behind, snow, a lot of snow, too much snow, and too much sun, too much rain, and always that special slouch, as if leaning toward another better planet with less ambitious generals. Less snow, less wind, fewer cannons, less history. Alas, there's no such planet, just that slouch. Shuffling their feet, they move slowly, very slowly, toward the country of nowhere and the city of no one on the river of never. That's refugees. I'll read one. I just skip because this otherwise. So actually, I would like to have read all of this, so, but unfortunate. But you can buy this. So reading Milosz. So he's talking to Milosz. I read your poetry once more. Poems written by a rich man, knowing all, and by a beggar, homeless, an emigrant alone. You always wanted to go beyond poetry, above it, soaring, but also lower to where our region begins, modest and timid. Sometimes your tone transforms us for a moment. We believe truly that every day is sacred, that poetry, how to put it, makes life rounder, fuller, prouder, unashamed, of perfect formulation. But then evening arrives. I lay my book aside and the city's ordinary din resumes. Somebody coughs, somebody cries, somebody curses. Piano lesson, and I'm 8 years old. Piano lessons at the neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. J. I'm in their apartment for the first time, which smells slightly different from ours. Ours has no smell, or so I think. Everywhere carpets, thick Persian carpets. I know that they are Armenians, but don't know what that means. Armenians have carpets. Dust wanders through the air, imported from Lvov, medieval dust. We don't have carpets or Middle Ages. We don't know who we are. Maybe we are wanderers. Sometimes I think we don't exist. Only others are. The acoustics are great in our neighbor's apartment. It's quiet in this apartment. A piano stands in the room like a lazy, tamed predator, and in it, at its very heart, dwells music's black ball. Mrs. J told me right after the first or second lesson that I should take up languages, since I showed no talent for music. I show no talent for music, I should take up languages instead. Music, but there may be other meetings, revelations. I went home hanging my head, a little saddened, a little glad, home, where there was no smell of Persia, only amateur paintings, watercolors, and I thought with bitterness and pleasure that I had only language, only words, images, and only the world. That's this thing. And yeah, we can go to the next one. So Milosz, Herbert, so they're dead, but their memory lives on because of the recent history of Poland. Some of these Polish greats are critiqued for their beliefs and politics. And therefore, how must, so this is the last slide, how must one look at them today? And again, this is an email from SC from Warsaw, and she says, and this is the last bit. The attitude of an author is important, but in the case of these poets who you mentioned, these were great minds, and therefore do not always have to be in line with every political line, or do not have to toe every political line. If some of the environment about Szymborska speaks only through the prism of her one poem from youth, so she wrote a short poem in praise of Stalin, so it shows these environments that they are not cheap to understand a simple thing. People change, their views evolve. Fortunately, Szymborska's poem was created in times when you could not write differently if you wanted to be published. And I feel that should be the basis for every writer. We'll go to the next one. This is just, This is just a short video, not video, this is a short sort of talk that Adam Zagajewski is sort of delivering. You'll get a sense of the Polish accent, you know, the thing that the lilting sort of thing. And of course, he's wonderful. You'll fall in love with him.
Luckily, I'm not an intellectual, I'm a poet. So. Good. I have two things, well, maybe more than two. The first thing is a political thing. I come from Poland, and you remember the beautiful solidarity movement who created some new, a real solidarity among the oppressed ones, and which was a beautiful human energy in it. And it created a democratic state after 89, which was not flourishing, but building its own future and relying on law. And now some of these same people from the solidarity movement have created a government which denies the achievements of solidarity, and which goes against the law. And these are the same people. It's not people from the planet Mars, you know, Venus and Mars. No, they're from the same movement. So it's a deeply disturbing thing that some mechanism of envy, of desire, of political ambition are pushing them to these ruthless action. The good thing is that there's a very strong resistance. We have a civil society which is not capitulating. The thing is not over. I'm pessimistic, but optimistic as well. But I'm here not as a politician, I guess, but as a poet, right? And Rab wanted me to say something about the beauty, the art, and I feel a little bit like someone coming from distant provinces, because you talk about power and politics, and poetry has no power at all. Very few people read poems nowadays, and yet it is a kind of secret power. You know, you could define poetry as the revenge of the introverts. We introverts, we have our secret world. We listen to music, we read poems, and we read philosophy. We don't create anything, we have no institutions. We live outside institutions. So I won't help you here. I feel like, you know, in the Russian literature there was a notion of a lishny человек, of an unnecessary human being, someone like the representatives of the Russian intelligentsia were defined by Turgenev and by other writers as unnecessary people. This was a kind of self-ironic description. But these people are not producing any wealth. Later, unfortunately, they produced the Soviet, you know, the Soviet system. So that's the revolution. You know, poetry and art. I mean, it doesn't make sense to speak separately about poetry together with arts, with music. There is kind of, as you say, a repository of some lucidity. Poetry gives us moments of lucidity. Poets are different from storytellers. We don't tell lyric poets don't tell stories. We react to moments of lucidity. A poem, a good poem, is a record of a moment of lucidity. There's no story in it, there's no lesson, there's no moral lesson, but the lucidity itself is a value, because for a moment we see better, we understand better, and this is what it means to be human, to have these moments of lucidity. So please let poets live.
I'm done. Okay.
Some questions if anybody wants to ask.
Yeah. So I must confess I'm not an expert, so it's all through this. And the other thing is that, you know, I've heard this man speak so much. There was a time when I started sounding like him, you know? And I was even thinking I'd probably do this whole thing in an Adams Agavinsky accent and so on. He's written a book which is sort of worth, I couldn't unfortunately bring it here. It's called A Slight Exaggeration, and it's a collection of essays. So for those of you who are keen, and you know, this might seem a bit overwhelming, and I've tried to condense it. It's called A Slight Exaggeration, and there's an anecdote behind it, which is that so he used to like to read poetry, and he had this sort of troubled relationship with his father, and his father always thought that this poetry stuff is like completely useless and redundant and so on. And he said, so one day he asked his father, his father asked him, what are you doing? And he says that reading. He says, again, poetry? He says, yes. And then again there's a bit of banter between the father and the son, and he says, but why don't you like poetry? He says, it's always a slight exaggeration. And so that's the title he borrows for the book, and of course then looks at all these grades. So that's a book worth looking at, and of course Milosz has written quite a bit, so yeah. And there is this extraordinary poem. So I've just written a few notes, points about this because this kind of contextualizes. Again, a very small poem which I'd shared with Nikhil, I think, and he put it up on social media. I don't know how to pronounce this name, but basically the poem's quite interesting because it looks at the history of the 20th century, and he says that the poet's actually looking at what he says is the history of mass crimes. And then he says it's also been a witness of sort of people who, men and women who were ready to offer their lives to the cause they were beloved for. And in this case, the moth is actually a symbol for those men and women who offer their, you know, lives for the cause. And he compares that faith and ideas to the urge of a moth to fly towards a candle, always towards destruction. But he's praising he's praising the striving of those people who are willing to go towards that dangerous goal and, you know, burn themselves up in that fire. This was an important poem in the context of some of the things I've been sharing about, particularly the troubled periods, the 50s, 60s and 70s in Poland, and was one that was, again, you know, as I was telling you, scribbled on the streets and this thing, the walls of Poland. Yeah.
Thank you so much for gathering here, and we really appreciate your company. I first of all want to thank Ramu sir. I really thank you so much for being a part of this. This is our third chapter. We started from Chile, we went to Pakistan, now Poland. In this journey, we've had a lot of support. We've gone through sheds, and this is one of the most beautiful sheds, the Marshall Theatre, run by a stalwart himself. And, so it's so like pleasing for us that we can be a part of this particular experience and work with Ramu sir and Sunil sir to get this experience together. We have a small team. We're trying to do these things together. There's Himali. She does PR and communication for us, and Akshat. And that's good. Yeah. So let me just introduce. So what we do is at the end of every reading, we give you a hint of the next reading, so that might make listen and come. So I have some friends in London, and we ask them a question. You know, every 15th of August we celebrate this day. What do you do on this day? They have a small theatre company which has about 30 odd playwrights. They responded in 10-minute pieces. I invite you on the 15th of August to come for the reading of these pieces. There will be a British perspective, the 15th of August.
Nice.
Thank you so much.
Where is it going to be?
I will tell you. That, so, we've not finalized the venue yet.